Community is often one of the most overpromised and underdelivered aspects of being part of a church. And so as lay people in a congregation, we can often feel the weight of disappointment around this without knowing what our part is in stewarding the community of the church. So in this conversation, what we're hoping to wrestle with is, what does it mean for lay people to serve alongside clergy as shepherds, stewarding the community not just within their congregation, but within the larger town, area, workplaces, and neighborhoods to which they belong. Can you share how in your own life you first felt called to shepherding other people in your community?
Well, I like to think of shepherding as being called to creating community. I feel like that's an accessible way to think of shepherding, especially for those of us who are not ordained. Because sometimes shepherding sounds so reverent maybe, or intimidating. And so when I think of it as creating community and being known, that makes it so much more accessible, and something that I think we all want is we want connection and we want to feel known. When I think of creating community as part of shepherding, it makes it not only feel like something that I do for others, but also something that deeply benefits me too. And it's transformative when I connect with other people. And I believe that's what shepherding is too. Shepherding isn't just about what do I do for other people, but it's also an opportunity to receive from other people as well.
What prevents people from feeling like, I can do this, I can step into shepherding and creating community?
Well, I think there are a number of things, but maybe deep down inside is a bit of fear, whether it's fear that I am not enough or fear that I do not have enough. I think both of those can come from a place of insecurity, right? And yet that is something we so deeply want someone to prove us wrong on, right? We want to hear that I am not too much or that I am not enough. And the weird thing is you can only experience that when you come into community with people. So the very thing that you're most afraid of is also the thing that you need to encounter. And you can't get to that other side unless you go towards that fear. Or sometimes maybe we get a little stuck too. I mentioned I've moved a lot, or God's called me to go to different places, and that can be scary for people. Feeling like you're still trying to figure out your community is hard. And then when you recognize that you found that community, maybe you want to hold on to it even tighter.
How have you seen this as important to the Wesleyan Church, right? How do you think this became an important part of what we believe and practice?
What I really think is amazing about the Wesleyan tradition and our Methodist roots is that in the time, it was so different from what was going on. When I think of the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, they had a great emphasis on ordained clergy, versus John Wesley really saw a purpose in the everyday people, the everyday laity, and the need for us to also feel empowered, that we were a kingdom of priests, right? And I think that's so important even in today's community. My trade is I'm a counselor, professor, and we often talk about the mental health needs of people outpace the number of counselors that we're able to produce as an industry. And so we need everyday people to also be aware of, how do I take good care of myself? How do I take good care of my neighbors and those around me? And that's the same question that John Wesley was asking too. And he knew that he as an individual wouldn't be enough to care for all of the sick and the poor around him. He knew that the community needed to feel empowered to help one another.
When you think about people who step into this and see this as maybe one of the top pursuits of their life, how have you seen them become more fully themselves?
I think whenever we're in the flow and when we're doing something we truly enjoy and feel like we're coming alive in, it doesn't just impact us, but it's contagious to other people. And that's what I see when I see people really in the flow of what they're doing and using to the fullest extent the gifts that God has given them in community, it not only transforms them, but it's attractive to other people. A story that comes to mind for me that maybe is an example of this, but it's actually not related to the church, it's just out living life, is at the Indy Mini. I don't love running. I want to say that. I don't love running, but I do love showing up and cheering on my friends. I think I love the atmosphere of encouraging other people and watching them as they are working so hard towards a goal. So I made a sign that said free high fives and just standing by. And it was so fun to see some people who their shoulders, they were running and focused on that. Their shoulders were hunched over, they were frowning and just it looked like they were in a lot of pain. When they saw my sign or when they saw other people encouraging them, wow, they were so transformed. Their shoulders are suddenly straighter. They had a little bit more pep in their step. Some people actually ran from the opposite side of the road over to me to get that free high five. And it cost me nothing, except just to be there. And not only am I impacting these people who are running, but there was a group of kids across the street from me that they were with some adults who were cheering on their friends. And at first the kids were just, doing their own thing, not really engaged. But as they saw how much fun I was having, they started getting into it and they started putting their hands out for high fives. And I think that's the ideal when we think of if we are doing something that is good for us and for those around us, why wouldn't people want to also get involved?
What does it cost to show up as a shepherd and one who creates community? And then what do we lose if we don't do it?
Being a pastor's kid, and my husband is also a pastor's kid, we don't feel called to be pastors, but also deeply respect our parents because we've seen them shepherd in ways that are so self-sacrificing. I am so in awe of when my parents and in-laws continue to serve people who have deeply hurt them and maybe continue to do that. And I think that's sometimes what it costs to be a shepherd. Is you're with sheep or people who are doing their own thing, and sometimes it feels like they have no regard for your feelings and your needs. I mentioned that at its best, when I enjoy shepherding, it is when I'm met with grace as well and feel cared for. But I know that that's not always the reality of when we feel called to shepherd other people. Sometimes there's deep hurt and deep risk. And sometimes, like I said, we have to face our fears of feeling like I am not enough, or there isn't enough. Sometimes it becomes true in some ways of I am not yet a fully refined and perfect person. And so in community, as I encounter other people, I will have to come to terms with that. I will also have to come to terms with not only people hurting me, but I have the propensity to hurt people daily. And that's something that I have to reckon with and deal with and potentially have to ask for forgiveness for. But sometimes we don't experience the depth of grace and forgiveness until we need it. And that's a scary thing, but it can be so fulfilling and rich. And when we encounter grace like that, that grace is exponential. And I think that grace continues to just move and grow. When we have received grace that deeply, it makes us more likely to also give that grace.
As you think about the ecosystem of most of our congregations, what does it mean for clergy and laity to find ways of shepherding together?
Two things come to mind. One is equipping, and two is trust. To shepherd together, we have to have the tools to shepherd together, right? And everyday laity need to also have those tools. But then the second thing too is that we need to trust one another. Sometimes in talking to my in-laws, thinking about them as they are pastors and thinking about how they empower their laity. They said a part of it is just trusting that people are going to do what the task that you've given them well, even if it's not the way that you would do it. Trust in that equipping isn't just important for the short term, but it's thinking about long term. Is the church going to be able to sustain itself without me? And that's a humbling place to be, I think.
As you think of your role in congregations, what guidance would you offer clergy who are looking to empower and invite lay people in their congregation to step into shepherding and community building?
I believe that asking questions is really powerful. I think maybe that's the difference between thinking about shepherding versus preaching, which I think that's what some people think shepherding is like you have to have a sermon ready. But shepherding is doing life alongside people, walking right there. And sometimes you can't do that well unless you know where they're at. And so ask questions, ask more questions and listen more. A lot of times people know the answer and they just need to process it themselves.
If you were to talk to people who are interested in becoming more capable at shepherding, where would you advise them just to start?
I guess number one is figure out where you're at. Whether it's growing in your own self-awareness or asking yourself more concretely, what is my context and what do I have influence in? And that doesn't have to be huge. It could be your family, it could be your church pew, or it could be the place that you work or your neighbors. And then thinking, how am I engaging with those around me well? I think about church specifically, and that's part of what made church feel like home for me, is that I knew all of the people in the pews around me. And you notice when they're gone and they notice when you're gone. And to be welcomed back, that feels so good. Going back to the root, the heart of this is shepherding is helping people to feel known and loved and cared for. And you can't do that if you don't know them.
What prayer of benediction would you offer us as we seek to step into shepherding in our context?
I think of this as maybe a prayer or a blessing for those who are afraid of if you are enough or if you have enough. May the Lord bless you and push you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be so gracious to you that you cannot help but be gracious to others. May you not fear if there is enough. Rather, may you give graciously and compassionately. Go in peace because you are seen and so loved.